So let's get to making the SQL up and running. Now, I have used the pin feature here to pin this to the top of the menu. So you'll notice the little pins here. You can pin or unpin items, so to make them show up at the top. It's quite a useful feature because if you scroll down to, say, storage or databases, there's a lot of options here to choose from, including SQL. Google gives you a plethora of options for databases. But we want to go to SQL because we're going to build a Postgres database. And you can click on Create Instance and choose the Postgres SQL. And it's going to ask us to enable an API. Google has everything locked down by default, so you don't get billed unless you really mean it. So I'm going to click on Enable API so that we can actually build this thing. And word of warning, there are going to be lots of starts and stops. I will try to pause the video while we're waiting for things and then resume once they finish. So if it seems rather jerky to you, that is why, but it's also why you're not going to sit here staring at swirly things until they're finished. Okay, so we've got it started. So we need to give our instance an ID. So, what can I call this? How about task list-instance for now? And we need a password for the instance. This is different from the database user password. I'm just going to hit generate. And you can see what it is there. I don't worry about exposing my password because I'm deleting this before I publish. You can choose your region. I tend to like the US Central region just because it's the default. But you can pick a region close to you. There are a number of them. Not as many as AWS, but quite a few. I also kind of like US Central 1 because there's only one US Central region. But pick whatever instance you want. And then you need to go to configuration options. So we're going to customize this a little bit. Specifically, we're going to go to connections. And we're going to give it both a public and a private IP address. Later on, we're going to disable the public IP address because we really don't want this accessible outside of Google. But initially, we want to see if we can connect to the online database first. So I'm going to go in and pick the default network for my deal. And it's going to say, oh, you need to set up a connection, which is fine. So I'm going to enable the API. I'll use an automatic IP address range when that finishes. So I'll just use an automatic one. Basically, this is the range of IP addresses for this network service. I'll hit continue and create. At this point, it's going to take a little while, and it will take even longer once this finishes because then I need to come down to the bottom and start the actual instance being created. So we'll pause for a little bit and come back in a second. Okay, so we've got the private IP and the public IP. And for the public IP, we're going to want to set up who can connect to it. Otherwise, anyone on the internet can connect to it, and that's no good. Okay, and with the public IP, now that that's finished, I can come in and say, okay, add a network that can access this from the internet. I'll say my home address, and I can go to whatismyipaddress.com, find my IP address here, and paste that in. I need to make sure I've There's no leading spaces or trailing. So this means that only somebody on my home network can access this task list database from the outside internet. So that'll be done. And there are other things we could do, but none of them really matter for us for our purposes right now. So I'm going to click on Create Instance. And at this point, get yourself a good long cup of coffee because it can last up to 10 minutes. So, and I have an error someplace. I had an extra field in here. And so my IP address, create instance, and now it's going to take a little while. So this is going to run for a bit until it finishes creating the new instance. Okay. Well, so now our instance is created. And so I'm going to copy one thing, well, a couple things. The public IP address. So public DB IP, private DB IP. And so when we're at home, we can use the public IP to connect to this database for now. And when we publish to Google Cloud, we'll use this local IP address to connect to it. So when your server's on the Google Cloud, you use the private IP because you're within their private network. And when you're at home, you've got to use the public IP so your app can connect from your computer up into the cloud to Google Cloud. I'm also going to copy the connection name because it's kind of handy. We're going to be able to look this up, use this to look things up. And I'm going to create a user in a database. So in databases, I'm going to click on Create Database, and I'm just going to call it task list underscore DB. And for users, I'm going to create a user account called task list user. And I'm just going to use my LastPass to generate a pretty secure password. So there we are. And I'm going to hit add. Oh, but I am also going to copy this to my notes. It's task list underscore user. And DB password for now. Note, I am not going to commit this file to Git because I don't want this to go on GitHub, but it's there. So I'll hit add, don't save. And so that's going to take a little bit of time, but we've got our database up and running. So now we want to be able to see if we can connect to Google Cloud from our personal computer. So I'm going to come in here and say, I'm going to run it even without Docker right now. I'm going to say db host equals, and I'll grab my public IP, and db user equals, I'll just put this to the side. So db user is that, and I think it's db underscore pass. So if I look at my deal, so db pass db host, db user, and db underscore name. So the database name is going to be equal to and I didn't save it, so I will go back to databases and copy that to my notes. So I've got my DB user, I've got the DB host, DB user, DB host, I've got the DB pass, DB name, just for consistency I'll make it capital letters, post and port. I'm still using the default, but I'll go ahead and do db underscore port equals 5432. I've got host, I've got name, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I got all of them, and then I'll just do and flask db migrate. So this is just going to run the migrations using these environment variables, just to see if, because I put db pass but no equal sign. So db pass equals, I'll grab my password. So we're setting environment variables, but just for one command. So run it. Okay, it ran that. Do the same thing with db upgrade, just to make sure all the migrations get run. Okay. So now I am going to temporarily go to Docker. Just open those up again. So my Docker script and db user is just going to be this. db pass. db host. db name, I don't think that changed. Port is still the same. So I think that's there. So now if I save this first, I can do scripts docker run. Oops, it started up and says task list user does not exist. So database task list user. I might have an error here, so I am going to task list user does not exist. And it's saying database task list user, which is a little bit strange. DB name, if I look at my Docker run, I don't see that any other place. And DB user is only under username. I can troubleshoot this by going to my dunder init file, and I can print this config and see what I get. And just to make it easier to find, I can surround it with stars. Okay. Oh, yeah. And so I'm going to do scripts docker build just to make sure I build with those changes in there. And then I'll run it. Okay. So when I look at this, task list user : the password, that's fine. The host, and then there's a slash and nothing. So I've got an error there specifying the database for some reason. So for some reason, it's assuming that the database name is not that. Let's do another print here. And I'll do another build and run. So it is task list DB. Oh, now it's working for some reason. It might have been, the problem might have been originally that I didn't build before I ran the Docker. So it was working off the previously built Docker image. So I'm going to delete all this junk and go back to my dunder init and delete that junk. So that's running. And if I go in and do localhost, it seems to be loading, and I can do /tasks. It should still give me an empty string or an empty array. It does. That's great. It's working. Hit Control-C to have it. So we have connected to SQL, Postgres or Cloud SQL from our local computer using Docker. We even did it with just our local computer as well, having the environment variables set. So we did it this way. We were running our machine locally using the flask command and having the environment variable set on the command line. And then we ran it with Docker with our little script file with a bunch of environment variables set here. Now, these are some things that we'll probably take out later on when we deploy to GitHub. But this lets us test and make sure we're able to connect to our production database, and it's up and running and working. We don't even need Postgres on our local computer now to have our API work. So in the next video, now that we've got that up there, we're going to start working on building the app as an image on we're going to build the app image on Google Cloud's image registry. So normally you can push your images to Docker's registry, Docker Hub. We're going to set it so that we can publish to Google's, and then we'll use that image and deploy it with Google Cloud Run in our final video. All right. I do want to mention there is another way to run this. You can run it probably even more securely with something called Cloud SQL Proxy. So if I go in back to this and I do Cloud SQL Proxy, so probably going to find this in the docs. So this is a little program that you can run on your computer, and it will basically pretend to be SQL or Postgres running on your computer. You connect to the proxy and it forwards all your things to the Cloud SQL instance securely. The way we've got it is we're connecting over the internet through TCP kind of openly. And so it's not quite as secure as going through the SQL proxy. But this adds a bit more complication, maybe another video. So again, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to build our image and save it on the Google Cloud Registry.